Welcome to Project Management. In this video, I will talk about organizational culture. In a previous video, we have looked at the effects of organizational structure on project management. Now let's check the effects of organizational culture on project management. The formal definition of organizational culture is that it's a system of shared norms, beliefs, values, and assumptions that binds people together. A simple explanation of organizational culture is that it reflects the personality of an organization. The organizational culture distinguishes it from other organizations. Just like each person has a unique personality, each organization has a unique culture. Organizational culture plays an important role on project management. People can identify with their organization and feel a vital part of it. Identity generates commitment to the organization. It's also one of the reasons for members to devote energy and loyalty to the organization. Culture helps clarify authority relationships in the management system. It provides reasons why people are in a position of authority and why their authority should be respected. Culture helps define what are acceptable behaviors and what are inappropriate behaviors. These standards span a wide range from dress code and working hours to challenging and judgment of superiors and collaborating with other departments. Just imagine if two members did not share similar beliefs, values, and assumptions. The result is chaos. Organizational culture will help maintain social order in business. As an example, watch this video titled Experiencing Google's Culture for a Week. Let's see another example, the famous 3M company. 3M's original name was Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing. It's now an American multinational conglomerate corporation. 3M employs 88,000 people worldwide and produces more than 55,000 products including adhesives, abrasives, laminates, fire protection materials, dental and medical products, electronic circuits, optical films, and car care products like sun films, polish, wax, car shampoo, treatment for the interior and exterior, and rust protection. Almost every American has used or will use 3M's products in their lifetime. The essence of 3M's culture is captured in phrases like encourage experimental doodling and hire good people and leave them alone. Watch this video to learn more about 3M. Research shows that there are many key dimensions that collectively characterize the essence of an organization's culture. As an example, this diagram kind of reflects these cultural dimensions. The first one is member identity. It measures to which degree employees identify with the organization as a whole rather than with their type of job or field of professional expertise. For example, I am a programmer versus I am a Google employee. The former reflects culture that emphasizes the job, and the latter reflects culture that emphasizes the organization. The second key dimension is team emphasis, or to which degree work activities are organized around groups rather than individuals. The third dimension is management focus. Does the management system focus on managing people or managing tasks? The fourth dimension is unit integration. Does the management system encourage working independently within the same department or working interdependently with people across multiple departments? The fifth dimension is control. Are the rules, policies, and direct supervision used to oversee and control employees very tight or very loose? The sixth dimension is risk tolerance. Are employees encouraged to be aggressive, innovative, and risk-taking? or the other way around. The seventh dimension is reward criteria. Are the rewards such as promotion and salary increases allocated according to employees' performance or according to seniority, favoritism, nepotism, or other non-performance factors? The eighth dimension is conflict tolerance. Does the company have a high tolerance for functional conflicts and open criticisms? The ninth dimension is means versus ends. Does management focus on outcomes, or does it focus on techniques or processes used to achieve those results? The last one is open systems focus. It measures whether the organization focuses managing the internal relations or it focuses on monitoring and responding to changes in the external environment. Note that certain aspects of the culture of an organization would support successful project management, while other aspects would undermine effective management. And in many cases, the ideal culture is not at either extreme of each of these dimensions, but at somewhere in between. A strong or thick culture is a culture in which the organization's core values and customs are widely shared, accepted, and practiced within the entire organization. In contrast, a weak or thin culture is one that is not widely shared or practiced within an organization. An organization may also have subcultures, which are the norms, values, and customs within specific departments or specialty areas. For example, different military branches like Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force may have very different subcultures. Countercultures may emerge, and they consist of a different set of values, beliefs, and customs, often in direct contradiction with organizational culture. Now there is a question. Are countercultures always bad? Watch this fun video from USA Today about teenager boys wearing skirts to school to protest against a no shirts policy. Another example of countercultures is that labor unions promote members' interests that are sometimes opposite to the organization's goals. So countercultures may not always be bad. They may provide creative thinking about how the organization should work. They prevent employees from blindly following one set of values. They also help the organization to abide by society's ethical value. To identify an organization's culture, you cannot simply rely on what people say about their culture. You should study the physical characteristics of an organization. For example, are the buildings and offices of the same quality for all employees? Or are modern buildings and fancier offices reserved for top management? You should read about the organization, examine the annual reports, mission statements, press releases, and even internal newsletters. Each of them reflects a different aspect of the organizational culture. You should observe how people interact with each other within the organization. What is their work pace? Slow or fast? Sometimes the stories and folklore surrounding the organization reflect what is important to an organization's culture. For example, watch this very old video about how Bill Gates experienced the blue screen of death while his team was demonstrating the new Windows 8 operating system at that time. This is a pretty embarrassing moment. People may read this as that Microsoft has a poor culture and tends to release products prematurely to the market, and the customers have to deal with all these bugs. Let's see a complete example and examine the culture of a hypothetical organization called Morgantown Solar, a solar panel manufacturer. We first check the company's physical characteristics like the office building, office layout, decoration, and business attire. What we see is that The company's headquarters is a 20-floor modern building. President on the top floor. Offices are bigger in the top floors than lower floors. Formal business attire is required. That means shirts, suits, and ties. People's power increases the higher up they are located. Now let's check the public documents about the company, including annual reports, internal newsletters, vision statements, and so on. On their website, we read the vision of the company: to be the global solar energy company that moves the world towards sustainability. In one of newsletters, it says, Morgantown Solar values integrity. We are honest with others and ourselves. We meet the highest ethical standards in all business dealings. We do what we say we will do. We walk in the office building and try to observe people's behaviors like pace of work, language, meetings, issues discussed, decision-making style, communication patterns, and so on. We found out that this company is using a hierarchical decision-making process. Work pace is brisk and orderly. Meetings start on time and end on time. Subordinates choose their words very carefully when talking to superiors. People rarely work past 6 p.m. The president of the company takes a top-performing team on a Caribbean cruise every year. While we were eating at the company's cafeteria, we heard some stories. For example, a young project manager, Jason, was fired after going over his boss's head to ask for additional resources. Many employees are thankful for Rachel, who is considered a hero for voluntarily taking complete responsibility for a technical error. Jacob was labeled a traitor for joining a competitor after working for the company for 15 years. Organizational culture has important implications for project management. Project managers have to be able to operate in several potentially diverse organizational cultures. This is a very challenging task. A project manager will be interacting with the culture and subcultures of his or her own parent organization. The manager will also be interacting with cultures of other organizations connected to the project, such as clients and customers, suppliers and vendors, subcontractors, consulting firms, government and regulatory agencies. There are strong relationships between project management structure, organizational culture, and successful project management. We can use a riverboat trip metaphor to describe the relationship between organizational culture and project management structure. Culture is the river and the project is the boat. Completing projects within an organization in which the culture is positive is like paddling downstream. Much less effort is required. Less formal authority and fewer dedicated resources are needed to complete projects in which the cultural currents generate positive behavior and cooperation essential to project success. Therefore, a weaker, more flexible project management structure such as the functional structure or a weak matrix structure will be sufficient. Conversely, trying to complete a project in a negative, toxic culture is like paddling upstream. Much more time, effort, and attention are needed to reach the destination. This would be the situation in cultures that discourage teamwork and cooperation, that have a low tolerance for healthy conflicts, and where getting ahead is based less on performance and more on cultivating favorable relationships with superiors. Therefore, a dedicated project team or a strong project matrix structure is needed to increase the chance of making the project successful. At the end of the video, let's talk about a case study of a hypothetical accounting firm with 150 employees. Let's hear the story of 4 employees, named David, John, Mark, and Carol. David is a corporate audit project manager. David's best team member is John, who has a reputation for coming up with innovative solutions. The firm has a tiered promotion system like junior accountant, senior accountant, manager, and partner. The promotion system cultivated a culture that features competition. Only 20% of the managers will be promoted to partners. Carol is a project management office manager. She is responsible for assigning personnel to projects. The firm is using a matrix structure to manage projects. Firm policy allowed the assignment of a staff accountant to multiple project teams charged by different managers. Mark recently joined the firm from a competitor company. He is appointed as a manager, and he just secured a major consulting project. Carol works with Mark to put together his team. Mark insists that John be assigned to his team. Carol decides to have John split time across both projects. David agrees reluctantly to Carol and Mark's suggestion, so John works for Mark in the mornings and works for David in the afternoons. During the first week of the new arrangement, Mark begs David to have John work the whole Thursday instead of just the morning on his project in a critical task. David agrees. Mark says to David he owes him one. The next week, when David calls Mark to request that he return the favor and have John work the whole Thursday for the auditing project, but Mark refuses. David tries again a week later and gets the same response from Mark. At first, John shows up promptly at 1 p.m. at David's office to work on the audit. Soon it becomes a habit to show up 30 to 60 minutes late. There is always a good reason. For example, he was in a meeting with Mark and couldn't just leave, or an urgent task took longer than planned. One time it was because Mark took his entire team out to lunch at a new Thai restaurant, and John was over 2 hours late because of slow service at the restaurant. In the beginning, John would usually make up the time by working after hours. But this creates tension for him at home because he has to spend less time with family. Later, David finds out that John is working on Mark's project in his audit project office. David meets with Mark to complain. Mark acts surprised and even a little bit hurt. Mark promises things will change, but the pattern continues. David knows that Mark plays golf with John on the weekends, and can just imagine John bad-mouthing the audit project and pointing out how boring auditing work is. David's project starts to slip behind schedule. One of the contributing factors is John's performance. David approaches John about this, and John becomes defensive. John later tells David that he finds it difficult switching his thinking back and forth between consulting and auditing. He promises to do better, but there's just a slight improvement in his performance. Later, John asks David to leave work early on a Friday so that he could take his wife and kids to a baseball game with tickets sponsored by Mark's client. John feels guilty to do it, but he has to refuse the request. After David's project further slips, he finally decides to pick up the phone and request an urgent meeting with Carol to resolve the problem with John's performance. He gets up enough nerve and dials Carol's number, but only finds out that Carol won't be back in the office until next week. 2 weeks later, Carol shows up unexpectedly at David's office. Before David has a chance to speak, Carol tells him that John came to see her yesterday. John confessed he was having a hard time working on both David's and Mark's projects. This stressed him out. He asked to be assigned full-time to Mark's project. Carol goes on to say that John didn't blame David. In fact, he had a lot of nice things to say about David. He just enjoyed the consulting project more. Carol concludes by saying, "Ultimately, I agree with him. I think this is best for the firm." Now here is a question. If you were David at this moment, how would you respond? This case is intended to illustrate the problems that can arise in a competitive work environment in which a matrix structure is used to complete projects. People may argue that David should tell his side of the story and complain about Mark to Carol. But it could probably be seen by Carol as sour grapes. Others may suggest that David at this moment should simply accept the decision, since it appears Carol has already made up her mind. David should take advantage of this situation to request additional support or adjust his project schedule. Once the project is over, David should approach Carol and tell his side of the story so that she can anticipate this kind of problem with Mark in the future. Second question. What could David have done to avoid losing John? David probably have already done his best and responded in a reasonable manner throughout this whole thing. Yes, he should have contacted Carol about the problem earlier, but there might be a good reason why he hesitated to do so. The firm's culture may be against ratting on a colleague, and complaining instead of solving the problem by yourself may be seen as incompetent. Some people will point out that David should have renegotiated his agreement with Mark when John's performance did not improve. Switching John's schedule so that he alternates days working on each project. Some people will point out these suggestions would depend on the nature of the tasks John was performing on the two projects, and whether Mark will agree on this schedule is unknown. The third question. What advantages and disadvantages of a matrix-type organization do you see from this case? The case tends to highlight the disadvantages of matrix management rather than the advantages. It's true that the flexibility to share critical resources across multiple projects is an advantage of this matrix project management structure. But at the same time, the flexibility can breed internal conflicts between managers who are trying to maximize contributions to their own projects. The last question is, what could Carol do to more effectively manage a situation like this? Some people may criticize Carol for coming up with a solution without consulting with David first. The culture and reward system at the firm appears to encourage the aggressive behavior exhibited by Mark. If top management wants to discourage this kind of behavior, then they could recruit less aggressive team players. They could incorporate the inputs of other managers who share resources with that person as part of the formal performance review in the tiered promotion system. Top management may also implement a formal project priority system. So if David's auditing project has a higher priority, then Carol should not approve Mark's request to share John in both projects in the first place. On the other hand, if Mark's consulting project has a higher priority, then David should have nothing to complain, and he should expect losing resources to other projects with a higher priority. To sum up, in this video, we learned the significant roles that organizational culture plays in managing projects. This is Wang. I'll see you in the next video.